In my discussion today of the theme of inventing the barbarian, considering Persians and classical Athens, we'll be considering it from a range of perspectives. After a quick historical overview, we'll look at the available material evidence for the question, that is, artifacts and also imagery. And then we'll consider what this yields in terms of general insights. Now, Herodotus gives us our best account of the expansion of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, who moved out from the heartlands of Parsa um, and his home, Pasargadae, and his tomb in the Persian homeland, to the north, to the east, to the west, and then the south, west to Lydia, where King Croesus was the capital, the Lydian king, known to the Greeks and friend of the Greeks. The conquest of Sardis was a major landmark in Greek history. The empire of the Persians contained many different peoples speaking many different languages. This is an important theme. Herodotus stresses it, but also Persian rhetoric stresses the numbers of people in the empire. We see this best articulated on the tomb of Darius at Naxuristan, where he says, I am Darius, the great king, king of kings, king of countries, containing all kinds of men, king in this great earth far and wide. Sometime after the conquest, the capture of Sardis, the Persian Empire began to expand further to the west. Their invasions of Greece are well known to us, that under Darius, which ended in the Greek victory at Marathon in 490. Under Xerxes' invasion, we had the major battles of Thermopylae in 480, Salamis, the major sea battle in 480, victory, I should say, and then finally the land victory at Plataea in 479. Now, that victory at Plataea involved many contingents of the Persian army, as Herodotus makes clear in his description of the Persian army before it set out in this great campaign. But we find that the Athenian vase painters carefully distinguish the different kinds of Persians or people in the Persian army. This is one excellent example. It's a sadly fragmentary cut by the painter of the Oxford Brigus, whose drawing makes clear what the imagery shows. Here we have a battle between Greek hoplites and Persians, but note that the Persians wear quite different kinds of corselets. The one on the left wears a fish scale corset. The one in the center, who's collapsing under this Greek spear, wears a composite corset. And the one at the right, retreating from the Greek, wears a quilted linen corset. Now, these different corselets clearly are intended to reflect the different peoples, contingents of the Persian army. Probably the one on the left is a Persian, the one in the center may be a Lydian, and the quilted linen corset is attested for troops from Egypt, Assyria, and Phrygia. All three carry the geron, the quilted webbed woven shield behind which the Persians could set their archers to shoot. The geron wall is attested even in Athenian vase painting of the Persian War period. Here we have another fragmentary cut by the painter of Paris, Gigantomachy, which shows the side view of a geron stood up, and behind it a Persian collapsing. The Persian as an enemy is very well observed. This accuracy of detail, Persian dress and weaponry during the Persian War period is most notable. And I would say that a common theme in the early imagery, that's the imagery from sort of 490 through 475, shows the Persians to be valiant warriors, even in defeat. The movement of victory in Greek imagery is from left to right, and typically the Greek hoplites are moving from left to right. The Persians may retreat behind the Greeks, may fall to the Greek shield, before the Greek shield to the spear. But note that they still wave their weapons. They're still holding their weapons. They haven't given up. They're still shooting. They're still grasping their swords. In other words, the Persians are valiant even in defeat. And that's important because there's respect for this enemy. It was a dangerous enemy, and the glory of the victory was precisely owing to how difficult it was. Now, the Persian booty from Plataea is discussed briefly by Herodotus. After the battle, the Greek troops entering, excuse me, the Persian camp at Plataea found what was described as tents adorned with gold and silver. Now, it's very hard for us to imagine campaign tents so elaborately adorned. So it's useful, in fact, in this context, to look at the evidence of the Ottoman Turkish campaign tents that were captured when the siege of Vienna in 1683 was broken by a combination of European forces, kings, and the tents placed in various European armories. So here we have fragments of tents and a whole Turkish tent showing their elaborate detailing and including appliques of silk, embroidery, and gilt leather. So tents adorned with gold and silver is what Herodotus says of the Persian tents. What does this actually mean? Could it be that here too we have gold attachments? Could we have had embroidery? It's hard to say. We do have evidence for gold clothing attachments from the Persian Empire. On the left, you can see clothing attachments excavated at Sardis, the Persian period tomb, showing Persian imagery. These would have been attached to clothes. We have lion heads with radiate manes without a provenance attested elsewhere, also clothing attachments. The booty from Plataea included also, both in the tents and elsewhere, drinking vessels described as fialae, other drinking vessels, and sacks of lebetes. Now, the fiale shape was well known to the Greeks, but the Persian take was quite distinctive. It had big lobes or horizontal flutes, like the lebes over the right-hand side, the deep silver bowl with horizontal flutes. Both of these come from a Persian period barrel in Lydia. Other drinking vessels, what does this signify? It could perhaps include the distinctive category of Persian metalware that's animal proton drinking vessels. This particular silver ramhead cup came from Usk-Kamennogorsk and is now in the Hermitage. In addition, the Greek troops stripped jewelry from the dead, described as pselia kai streptus. These would seem to be armlets and torques worn around the neck. They are depicted in Persian imagery. This is the glazed brick frieze from the palace at Susa in the Louvre, where you can see that the Persian wears armlets, and some have been found, some at Sardis and some elsewhere. In Greece itself, not many Persian objects have been discovered. Very few are possibly from this huge extent of booty. One certain example is the helmet excavated at Olympia, the sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia, which was incised with the inscription, taken from the Medes. So absolutely is dedication of booty. A bronze bit excavated on the Acropolis in the 19th century is certainly a Persian style of bit. Perhaps booty, perhaps subsequently located, dedicated. From elsewhere in Greece, Greek sanctuaries, the sanctuary of Zeus at the Dona and the sanctuary of the great gods at Samothrace, small gold pacing lion clothing attachments have been found. These are certainly Persian in style. Another Persian item is the very tip of a handle, an ivory handle, possibly of a knife blade, with a distinctively Persian styling of the animal head. Moreover, some stamp seals have been excavated in Greece. One found in Athens is now in Berlin, and one excavated in Olympia is in Olympia. We might ask ourselves, what was the impact of the Persian booty? The Persian animal head drinking vessels seem to have played a role in the Greek response. An interesting silver tetradrachma series from Delphi, where booty was dedicated, seems to show ram head drinking vessels, just like or similar to a silver ram proton vessel that is now in New York. More interestingly, such Persian metal vessels inspired ceramic imitations in Athens, amongst the potters of Athens. We have here two lion head cups potted by Durs, the great potter of the early 5th century, where a handle has been attached to help the Greek drinker hold on to it. Other imitations of Persian metalware in Athenian ceramic include a deep-lobed bowl like the deep fiale we see on the left, and a bowl with horizontal flutes. This reflects a phenomenon that I have dubbed perserie. The term is derived from the well-known phenomenon in modern history, chinoiserie, when it became fashionable to have Chinese items in people's possession. But this phenomenon of perserie seems in fact to have begun before the actual Persian invasions. We have a ram head cup, bent round head cup, dating about 500, that clearly follows the Persian idea of ram head drinking vessels. This may in fact reflect a response to, a reaction to the arrival of prestige goods from the Persian court at Sardis into Greece. Now, the Persian booty from Plataea included multicolored textiles. Raja says they made no account at the time, but we know from Persian evidence that Persian clothing was very highly variable in color, polychromatic, unlike Greek textiles, which tend to be quite monochromatic. There are two dress systems in Persian. The one is the rider dress, which includes leggings and exirides. And here you see fragments from Susa's glazed brick Persian palace decoration of men walking in procession wearing these anaxirides. You can see the patterning, the vivid patterning, and the range of colors in the patterning here. Persians also wore the court robe, whose name may have been the kippasis. It's harder to get a sense of its decoration, but Attilius, on gazing in conservation at Persepolis some time ago, studied very closely the relief sculptures at Persepolis, and the drawing you see on the left-hand side reflects the traces of textile ornamentation at the Persepolis tripylon entrance, with there's evidence that those different patterns were in fact painted different colors. Similarly, in the harem was documented traces of paint at the bottom of the court robe worn by the majestic figure here, the king here. On the right, you can see the traces of red and patterning with blue shoes down below. Now, this elaborate Persian dress inspired Athenian fashion innovation. One good example is this basket bearer, that is a Kneiphoros, who heads a procession, a sacrificial procession to Apollo on the vase painted about 430. She wears, over her standard Greek chiton, she wears patterned sleeved garment. You can see different rows of different kinds of patterns. It has a fringe at the bottom. All this is very uncharacteristic of Greek clothing. Greek dress can readily be characterized as a rectilinear wardrobe. Greek garments were basically, once finished from the loom, taken off and suspended, hung, tied around the wearer. This is true of male dress as well as female dress. The himation, the cloak, is wrapped over the shoulder and over the arm. The chiton is wrapped from one side to the other and fastened at the shoulders. The peplos is fastened at one shoulder. Persian dress, in contrast, is tailored and has sleeves. A, a procession relief from nobles at Persepolis shows the two different dress types I've just mentioned. That's the court dress, the kippasis, the long robe, and the rider dress, which has distinctive leggings and the sleeved garment. From about 440 in Athens, we find traces of the appearance of sleeves worn by Athenians, women and children. I show you here three pieces of evidence. One is a funerary stele, the woman wearing a jacket. You can see the sleeves of her jacket. Um, a child wearing a jacket in the center, and a woman wearing a sleeved garment at the right, underneath her peplos. Very important evidence about this phenomenon comes to us from the sanctuary of Artemis at Brauron. Epigraphical evidence is very helpful here. At Brauron, women and girls at times of life transitions made dedications of personal items, including clothing. These items were put in lists, and the lists of votive offerings survive. They do include worn clothing. One very especially interesting category that's listed here is the Candace. And I should quote here one inscription, Diophante, wife of Hieronymus of Acharnae, with gold attachments worn. So this Diophante, who was a mature woman, dedicated a Candace with gold attachments that was well worn. She had used it during her life, and for whatever reason, dedicated it to Artemis. Now, the Candace is attested in several other as offerings by several other women in the inventory lists. This one is especially informative because it mentions the gold attachments and also that it is worn, rakos. Now, the Candace is well known to us as the garment worn with the rider dress by Persian men. Its distinctive feature is sleeves hanging down the shoulders, hanging empty. The Greeks seem to have worn their Candace by putting their arms through them. And so we have this phenomenon, perserie, uh, a jacket, highly elaborated dress. It especially happens from about the mid-5th century. We find this attested in vase painting from about the mid-century. That's the fashion of dress. Long after the Persian war booty flowed into sanctuaries and treasuries. What's interesting is the comparison with the phenomenon of tukerai, which is a term used for what happened in especially Europe after the siege of Vienna was broken in 1683. So the Ottoman troops had progressed into Europe as far as Vienna, where the various different companies of kings, the Poles, the Germans, others came and broke the siege of Vienna. Here we find a man, Markgraf Ludwig Wilhelm von Baden, that is a German, who had his portrait painted in 1686, 3 years after the siege was broken. He was known as the Turken Louis. He's Ludwig Louis, who defeated the Turks. And here he's fully dressed in Turkish dress as a sign of victory. The idea of Tücherei continues quite some time afterwards. You'll be familiar with Mozart's production, The Abduction from the Seraglio, which is set in a Turkish court. And the singers singing in it typically wear Turkish dress. So perserie, sort of taste for Persian style goods, we can see in the arts. But there's also evidence, perhaps, for Persian social manners being adopted. We see some instances of what seem to be Persian-style drinking. In the center here, you see a man seated at a symposium with his friends just down below. You can see the whole crater, holding a drinking vessel, a bowl, on his fingertips. Now, this is attested as being a Persian mode of holding a drinking bowl. To his right, from a different crater and of a different symposium scene, we have a Greek holding a bent animal proton vessel turned into a rhyton to pour liquid from uh, into a lobed drinking bowl below. So people seem to have adopted, uh, occasionally from time to time, the Persian mode of drinking. But when we consider the big picture, the invention of the concept of the barbarian and Athenian vases, um, we need to look over the longue durée. And we can do this through representations of Persians. Now, I've already mentioned that in the vase painting of the Persian War period, that's 490 to 475, we have a very clear indication of interest, pot painters knowing about and interested in the ethnographic elements of the Persian armies. And they seem to show this with some respect. That is, the Persians are shown as valiant, worthy opponents. From about 475, the imagery shows increasing stereotypy and distortion. In one good example, on a crater in Basel, we have on one side of the crater a Greek hoplite, heroically nude, spearing Persian falling. But on the other side, we have a cowardly Persian fleeing, frontal faced, arms stretched out in fear, full stride, flight. We have mockery of the Persian cavalry, which we know from the historical sources is a very important, strong part of the Persian armed forces. And the mockery comes in the form of inversion of Persian power imagery. The Persians prided themselves as being great horsemen in the Persian inscriptions. But here we have an anakwe, which shows a Persian warrior riding side saddle on a mule. What's more, his gesture suggests his mule stops, refuses to go. Look at the mule's ears. He's a stubborn mule, does not want to go anywhere. So the poor Persian noble has to wait for his attendant to arrive with the flop, his little crock there, to get the Persian mule to go. This is an undercutting of Persian power imagery. We find that on Athenian vase paintings as well, when we have representations of shall we say, audience scenes, we have here the king seated on a klismos. This is the comfortable chair known in Athenian households, especially in Attic art, used by women. And this particular figure is not only seated on a klismos, he does seem to be holding a staff. He's being attended by women. The one at the left is actually wearing a man's canvas over her shoulders. You can see the sleeves hanging down. The one on the right is holding a bow. Could she be meant to be the royal weapons bearer, a figure who's definitely well attested in Persian audience imagery? So it's undercutting the strength of the Persian. And from about 430, we get strong representations of the Persians as having a wholly luxurious court lifestyle. This is an excellent example of a volute crater in Vienna, sadly damaged on the surface, but you can see from the drawing we have here the royal figure seated, this time on a proper thronos, not a klismos. But he is being surrounded by lots of beardless people, dancing, playing music, entertaining him. It's complete luxurious emptiness. The only bearded figure is what must be the royal weapons bearer up above the right with a axe. So we find in this period of about we find changes over time of the general predominant attitude from the strong ethnographic interest and respect of the Persian War period, and the sense that the peoples of the Persian army are valiant, worthy opponents, through the increasing stereotypy and ideological distortion, and then from about 430, increasing focus on luxury, the concomitant attitude that Persians are effeminate, luxurious, worthy of scorn. So we can track from this range of evidence some general understanding of what is happening in classical Athens. And what we can see is divergent attitudes, divergent over time, but also contemporary in some senses. So the prestige of Persian goods, we can see already attracted emulation already in the 6th century after the Persian sack of Sardis, conquest of Sardis. And we know there were diplomatic relations going between the Greeks and the court at Sardis. Enmity, the absolute hostility, predominates in the Persian War period. But as I've said, the imagery shows that the enemy is respected. Weapons and tactics are closely observed. Also, there's emulative imitation of Persian ideas throughout the 5th century. The Persians are a model for elegant lifestyle, elegant modes of living and fashion, as well as of clothing from about 440. Disparagement of the Persians, the kind of disparagement that we see in the literary texts, develops only late in the 5th centuries. So, in the course of their role as an empire, the Athenians utilized Persian ideas while developing their own imperial culture. It's a very complex relationship between the two. And the fact that Athenians adopted Persian imperial procession imagery in their own political public rhetoric is very important to keep in mind. It's a complex world, complex relations, and there's no such simple concept of the barbarian. We can call the invention of the barbarian as something that happens later in the 5th century, but only really then. Thank you.